I want to show you an image. That's an image of a popular Kenyan delicacy, a street snack, mahindi choma. I'm sure a few of us here are already salivating. I'll tell you a funny story. So a few years ago, I was in Paris, and after a long day at work, I was walking back home to get into the metro. The metro is like a train. And just before I got into the train, I saw from the distance a guy selling mahindi choma. And out of curiosity, not because I wanted a snack, but I was just feeling like, how comes someone is selling mahindi choma in Paris? This is a Kenyan thing. So I wanted to find out if this guy is really a Parisian or a Kenyan. And when I went close to him, I asked him, Niaje, which is like a way of saying hi in Kenya. The guy said, poa poa. So my question was already answered, that this is a Kenyan. So I got my piece of the Kenyan delicacy, and started hanging out with the guy, just talking about home. And I noticed one more thing, that most of his clientele were also Kenyan, which is surprising because there are only few Kenyans you can find in Paris. And, majority of his clients were Kenyan, also in some, Europeans trying to get some, exotic delicacy from Africa. So this example and many examples illustrate one thing, that there are many experiences that we share as Kenyans that are sort of our unspoken, unexpressed sentiments that we have grown up with that define what it uniquely means to be a Kenyan. That we share, a few examples would be, how we get around in town, our popular metro, the matatu. When you're broke and hungry in campus, you get something we called chapati madondo, which is like a popular snack. The motorcycles, the boda bodas, those are uniquely Kenyan things that we see every day. They define our lives. Even in our language, there are certain phrases that we use on the streets to talk to our friends that are uniquely Kenyan. A good example is, niko kwa jam na kam. Alipigwa ngeta. Yeah? Ni mpesa maradat. You have to be Kenyan to get that. But you might ask, aren't these things obvious? Isn't this the same with every country? But I say no. It's not obvious. And to illustrate that, I'll give you a brief lesson in history. So, when the imperialists arrived in Kenya, the state, that thing that collects the taxes and builds roads and schools, did not exist in this part of the world. Kenya as a nation did not exist either. But what existed were nations. Down south, in the plains of Kajiado, we had the Maasai. Up north, in the hills of Kiambu, we had the Kikuyu. East, in the semi-arid region of Machakos, we had the Kamba. And these nations coexisted, and they had different histories. They had different cultures. Some were similar, but they were different, and they looked at themselves as nations. But the white man did not care about any of that. He realized that this region, this part of the world, has an incredible economic potential. And he wanted to extract this economic potential. That's the main reason he came here. And so what he decided to build a state. A state that would collect revenue from this part of the world and send it back to the British Crown. In exchange, the British Crown would offer protection and would build roads for the white settlers and the imperialists that were here in Kenya. Remember, we still do not have a nation. So those were the foundations of Kenya as a state, a protectorate, a colony. This is an image of a street in Kenya that was built for the same purpose, Delame Avenue. Today it's the Kenyatta Avenue. So that's how, those formed the roots from which the Kenyan state grew. When we got independence, something significant happened. That the state changed hands. It changed hands from a British governor to a Kenyan. And these Kenyans to which the state was handed had a huge responsibility to do one thing, to build a nation. And number two, to extend the state. Unfortunately, our founding fathers quickly abandoned the idea of nationalism and started expanding the state, building more roads, building more schools, building more hospitals. That is also important because Kenya badly needed that for the popular mwananchi. But they forgot the one thing that is very important. You can only extend a state too far, but without a nation, you wouldn't have the state. There are other people who tried it, and I want to give credit. People like Tom Mboya, who died too soon before they realized the full effect of what they were trying to do. And other nationalists across Africa, Kwame Nkrumah, who tried to build a nation first. A favorite example is Julius Nyerere in Tanzania, who took a different direction. You know, instead of building and expanding the state, he built a nation, and that's why most of the problems to do with rivaling tribes in Tanzania you won't find. So I think this is an important moment to define a nation, what a nation is, and the difference between a nation and a state. I've talked a lot about the state. You know, that machinery, that organism that collects the taxes and builds roads and schools and institutions, right? But a nation is people. A nation is a group of people who have common experiences, a shared culture, a shared language, but more importantly, things they can identify with, things that are collective, a collective history. And you might ask yourself that since independence, you'd argue that after independence, that significant moment in history would have created a shared experiences for Kenyans, but that was not the case. Because Kenya has always been a group of tribes coexisting, a group of nations coexisting. And most of our leaders have not labored hard enough to build a nation that feels one. But now we do. Now we have a new generation of Kenyans who feel that they have a 360-degree Kenyan experience. The experiences I described before, the common language, niko kwa jav na kam, the shared food, the shared history, you know, experiences like tamarking for years trying to find a job. Those are our experiences for this new generation. Our fathers had a different experience. You know, they spent months in bushes trying to pass a rite of passage. Or our sisters or our aunties, they spent months with our grandmothers trying to learn how to behave as a woman. But our new generation has a different experience. And experiences that build a nation, that makes us feel like this is the new Kenya. But there's a difference between feeling that we are one Kenya and consciously living those experiences and having those experiences influence how we behave, how we vote, which leaders to elect, which teams do we support locally, who do we marry. And that's where the media comes in. The old media has failed us, both on the platform side, because we no longer sit down at 9 p.m. trying to catch up with the daily news. By 9 p.m., I already saw the news on Twitter. And also on message. The message they're trying to propagate is the message that they were propagating when we were still a colony. Because most of these media houses were founded in the 1910s and 1920s, when Kenya was still a protectorate. And so the message is of divide and rule. You know, which tribe is fighting against which tribe? Who is the kingpin of this tribe? That's the kind of message that they have. But there is a new kind of media. The new media is smart. The new media has risen up to the challenge of the new generation. It inspires us. It inspires us with stories that collectively makes us feel proud of being Kenyans. The story, for example, of Mekatilili Wamenza, who was a female leader of a people in the coast of Kenya, who walked 700 kilometers to Mumias, western part of Kenya. And she was welcomed by the people there who did not know her language, did not know her, but they felt a certain kind of common bond. That story of heroism and community is the story that the new media needs to propagate, to inspire us. Stories of Tom Mboya. Stories of Dedan Kimathi. The new media needs also to educate us. The new generation doesn't want to be looked down upon or to be talked down upon, to be told this is how you're supposed to do things. The new generation wants to be given information, to be given opportunities. And so that, I believe, is the biggest role of the media, to educate, to tell you this is how you're supposed to do things, figure it out. These are the opportunities, take advantage of them. And one more thing, the media needs to tell us where we are at this critical journey of building a nation. In this historical context of Kenya, from before independence to after independence, where are we in that direction? What's our vantage point? That should be the role of the media. And then the new media also has gotten it right on platform, of course, that the new media is social. What you share with your friends is your reality. It's what defines who you are. And so this new thing in Kenya, people call it, most of our leaders call it the spirit of the Constitution. And I feel like they're jumping the gun, because you cannot have the spirit of the Constitution without having the ownership of the Constitution. And you cannot have ownership of the Constitution if you don't live like a community, if you don't feel a sense of oneness. And the media has a critical role of showing us how one we are, that these experiences we are living are unique and they are what define us. And when you have the community right, then you'll have ownership right, and then you'll have the Constitution right. The Constitution would be self-evident. The US Constitution, for instance, says we hold these truths to be self-evident. They cannot be self-evident if you're not a community. And when we respect and honor our Constitution, that's when we build institutions. And we've seen the TED talk from Fred Swanika, who said that the new kind of leaders in Kenya need to build institutions. But I'll argue it starts before that. It starts by building a nation. It starts by creating a new sense of nationality across Africa. Then after that, then you'll start having ownership of the Constitution, respecting law and order. And then that's when you'll start fighting the vices of abuse of office or corruption. And it's after we do that that we'll see the problem of poverty being solved, for instance, or the economic growth of Africa being accelerated. So let's talk about this idea. What's your ideal Kenya? My Kenya is a Kenya where, for instance, language, that is the port that transports culture and stores history, is used in a different way in Kenya. For instance, the language that I write my resume in should be the language that I send my email in, should be the same language that I speak to my peers in the streets, and should also be the language that I speak to my grandmother in. Niko kwa jam na kam. And so I pose this question to you. What's your ideal Kenya? What's your Kenyan dream? So let's have this, ladies and gentlemen, let's have this conversation. Thank you.